All right, Mike Sennello here with the Liberty Block. Sorry, folks, if we've run a bit late. We got kicked from the original Facebook stream, probably because it was taking me too long to build it. But we're here. We're also on YouTube, which I will have to post a link to that in the video's description after we run through this. Today we're going to have a special episode of Liberty Block Live where we're going to be interviewing Joël Valenzuela. So, Joel, thanks for coming on.
Hey, how's it going? Yeah, sorry about that, the delay. Even though it wasn't my fault, it might have been
it was entirely my fault.
We're running
entirely my fault.
It's okay. We're just running on Mexican time. That's fine.
Yeah. Well, the truth is I spent the first 33 years of my life relying on Eastern time. And for the first time ever on my calendar here, since I moved to Central, I put the Eastern time up on the calendar rather than the Central time. And yeah, so my bad.
Yeah.
But anyways, thanks for coming on.
Facebook made sure to punish you for your insolence, but we're all good.
Yeah. I wouldn't say I got zucked. I think it's part of the design of Facebook to begin with. But moving forward, so the title and the theme was supposed to be Corona and crypto. So that's what we're going to have a conversation about because this is something that has come up. This is something you and I talked about last week when we were talking about what we wanted to get into. So Joel, tell people how they can reach you first, and then we'll dive right into this conversation.
Yeah. So if you're a Twitter person, at the Desert Links is great. Desert is in dry place. Links is in kitty cat. And I also run a YouTube channel and also on Library, the Library Decentralized Network, which lbry.tv called by the same name, the Desert Links. And then all my crypto related content, which is honestly a lot more right now than Liberty, political, whatever, is Digital Cash Network. So that's just the places you want to look at. And yeah, it's pretty easy to find. There's not a lot of people competing for those names. Not a lot of people want to be a Desert Links or a Digital Cash Network. So pretty easy to find.
Yeah. So it may look like I wasn't paying attention, folks. No, I was just trying to get some stream information hammered through as we go live here. So sorry if it looks like I was a bit distracted there for a moment. So Joel, we talked about how with what's happened now with the expenditures, what you're going to, of course, with Corona, we all know that we have, we basically have taken out $7 trillion in COVID-related debt.
Yes. Freudian slip there, I see, huh?
Yeah, Freudian slip. My apologies. So what we talked about is how the volatility of fiat currency is unlike the stability that you can see in crypto. So
yeah,
I know it wasn't what you were suggesting is why you would make the transition. I suggested there was 3 different arguments, but how would something like what's invariably going to happen with the U.S. dollar, how would that relate to how mechanically something like crypto would handle that?
Yeah. So first, on the subject of volatility, right now the volatility of cryptocurrencies is significantly higher than fiat currencies because it's still early days, it's still new adoption. The price goes up and down, up and down. The problem is, the benefit, up and down in a upward trajectory, whereas fiat is pretty stable in a downward trajectory. So that's kind of like the nuance in the whole thing. Yeah, basically, it's pretty simple. Like, you have a limited supply of any given thing, and then the demand being equal, you increase that supply, and the individual units of those go down in relative value. So say you got like 10 trinkets, you produce 90 more, but people only have the same demand for that. Then each one of those is going to be worth 10% of what it was before, all other things being equal. Now that doesn't really matter if each person with 1 now gets 9 new ones. Now they get 10. The problem is when the government inflates money, they keep all the new ones, and so you're just keep going down and down and down. And obviously, this is kind of like a well accepted tenet of libertarian philosophy or whatnot, but now we're starting to see that kind of thing in an accelerated pace. Now we're starting to see a lot of extra money printing and things like that I'm starting to sort of see that this could accelerate the demise of fiat currencies. And in fact, I just saw an article today about Lebanon is facing a whole lot of riots right now because of a potential impending. Basically, the currency is collapsing right now. It was kind of on shaky ground. The whole Corona stuff hit, and now it's done. And so we might be able to see something like this happen in the U.S. in the near-ish future, in the next few years. And so that's why, I mean, generally speaking, I try to educate people about, the amazing technologies that are coming out, and, cryptocurrency being one of them. And hopefully they get a little bit more, they do their own research, look into it, just start saying, oh, I think I like this. I think I understand it, more importantly. And now I'm getting a little bit more of a sense of urgency. I still want to promote things responsibly, but I think that if people do not diversify into some sort of a scarce asset, there will be pain in the future. It's looking like. So, not investment advice, not anything like that. I just think that if you don't have something that cannot be manipulated like that, then you're going to, you could risk a big chunk of your savings. And I mean, obviously precious metals like gold and silver work for that. But one of the reasons I specifically advocate for cryptocurrencies is that you can actually use them. And so there's a lot of, doomsday kind of fantasy scenarios of, the dollar collapses, and then, people who've been hoarding gold bullion, all of a sudden, they're not only saved, but they're kings in this new land of desolation. The problem is that fantasy, the next step never quite gets visualized of, all right, so everything, like they say, like, how do you buy your normal things? Okay, well, the dollar doesn't work anymore. How's the gold going to work? And you can say theory, but like, okay, you got like a gold coin. How do you take it to the grocery store? Do they know what it is? Do they know how much do they know how much it's worth? Like, I have this little gram of gold right here. How am I going to go buy anything with that? And how are people going to store? How are people going to relearn to trade? How are people going to verify I'm not faking it? Like, the whole system, I'm sure it's possible, but it's not like instantly you're going to have some really rough times. And so that's why I'm trying to get people to do something that is actually being used in trade and commerce today, and that, you can actually live entirely off of cryptocurrency if you put your mind to it.
Really? Okay. So you're saying this from New Hampshire?
Yes, but also globally, depending on where else. So in New Hampshire, there's a very strong cryptocurrency community, and there's been some good work that has been put in by some local advocates to get a bunch of small businesses around here to accept cryptocurrency directly for payments. Now, elsewhere in the world, it's not usually that easy, but that doesn't mean it's not possible. There's more than enough workarounds that allow you to pay significant, portions of bills, etc., with cryptocurrency. And to that effect, I'm encouraging at the start of May a 30-day fiat-free fast of basically, let's just see how much of this we can cut out of our lives over the course of a month. Give it a shot, see how far you go, and then you might be surprised. You might be, oh wow, I got 30% out. I only need fiat for 70% of my life. Oh, I only need it for 10%. I mean, I paid my electricity bill with crypto the other day. So, I mean, there's few things you could really just cannot find a workaround for.
Yeah. So this whole conversation came up because of coronavirus between you and I. And you talked about how you can use it today as its own currency, and that the technology is there to make that transition more smoothly than you could for, say, fiat currency. Now, I would just give a little bit of pushback in that Peter Schiff talks about how there are companies right now that do have what are effectively plastic cards that aren't technically credit cards, but they represent gold currency, and you can use them similarly in that way. So with people, a lot of people are in a position now where they lost their jobs, and coming out of the back end of Corona, a lot of these jobs, because of what we're realizing with Corona, may or may not be there like ever again. There's been a lot of talk about how the technological advancement that's going to come as a result of Corona is going to include a lot of people who are going to be working at home. So there's a
Yeah.
there's a downstream effect of that that's going to probably permanently vacate certain positions. So is there something that people in those positions could make use of for crypto now that would be to their benefit for that circumstance?
Yeah, so there's kind of a couple things there, which is the first is the living off of not fiat in a increasingly digital and virtual and distance work from home kind of world, and also losing your job. And for the first of those, the thing that got me into cryptocurrency way back in 2012, 2013 was I was going after one of those gold-backed debit cards. I wanted one because, hey, this is sound money. I want to be able to spend it, even if it's in a kind of indirect sort of a way. And I just ended up using cryptocurrency instead, and it's now sort of never looked back. There do exist a lot of solutions like that currently for cryptocurrencies where you could basically load up an account with crypto, and then you swipe the card and it debits and turns it into fiat at the point of sale. Now that's kind of like what I would call like the laziest way of living off crypto, because it's just basically so easy. But now if you try to compare that with like a gold debit card, here's the reality. I cannot take this little bit of gold right here. I can't take it and like stick it into my USB port here, and then it just loads onto some gold-backed debit card. Like if I have physical currency that I hold, physical scarce assets that I hold, I can't. The time process for that to be converted into something I spend is a long time, even with workarounds. Now I can have a hardware wallet or a little like cold storage thing for a cryptocurrency, and within under 5 minutes have that loaded onto some sort of a card-like service. And and that's assuming you need that. If you don't, you can pay directly. It's even better. So that kind of it's just a lot more frictionless in that kind of a virtual environment type thing where you're using that. Now, as the real challenge, I mean, I'm not one of those people, and never have been one of those people that thinks, hey, this awesome thing that I like and I think will change the world, it's going to solve every problem in the world instantly. There will be no more hunger. There will be no more violence and war. Everyone will be, holding hands to get singing together. And that's not quite like that. So if we're facing a unemployment crisis, you can use digital currencies to make a living in ways that it would be more difficult to not use them. There's a few different opportunities. So first off, anything that requires so here's how human behavior works, right? If the cost of something is too high, people won't do it, right? There's a certain thing where, say you have say if you can hire an employee that you have to pay them $15 an hour, you'd really want the help. That's too expensive. You'll just do the work yourself. You'll just like do fewer sales, do whatever. But if you can hire for like $7 an hour, now all of a sudden you're willing to do that. And it's the same thing with actions. Like, for example, every barrier you put between the user and the end action. So whether it's like sign up for a service, whether it's, whatever it is, makes them less likely to complete that. And that includes invoicing, for example. So say, hey, I want to go hire a freelance writer to write this quick little blog post. It's like 200 words. It's 300 words. It's just like the bare like SEO minimum to like do well. And it's like, I just want to hire a guy for this, and just like a one-off thing. And it just want to give the guy a shot. And you're like, great, I'm going to pay you. And it's like, then you get into the invoicing problem where now you're like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to drop an invoice. I got to do this. I got to send it to them either by mail or there's electronic ways of doing it. But still, it's like, and then I got to like start, rather than just here, zap, let me zap you digital cash through the screen. And then that makes it a lot easier. And there are quite a few sites out there that let you freelance for cryptocurrency. Now, in addition to that, there's a lot of blogging platforms and things like that that allow for micro tipping, where you just can't really micro tip with fiat currency. It just doesn't really work that well. But so, for example, I post a lot of videos and other content on the library platform, and then instead of giving me likes like you would on YouTube, where you just give a little thumbs up, people will send me like a few cents of the digital token, and before you know it, that like adds up, and then you could be making like first you make a few bucks on a video, then you may make more than that, and then you can actually make a living off of that. And if you want to do that via advertising revenue on YouTube, you need 1,000 subscribers and like 4,000 hours of view time before they'll even talk to you.
Yeah, well,
So,
it's even worse than that. It's 4,000 hours of view time in a month, which people. So YouTube measures its view time in minutes.
mm-hmm.
So when you get reports from YouTube, it's measured in minutes. There's a reason they list it under the requirements as hours, because if they did 4,000 hours and converted that to minutes, it's 250,000 minutes in a month, and yeah, it makes it look as daunting as the task actually is. But go ahead.
Yeah,
and then you're right. Then they will come talk to you and approve your channel for monetization.
Yes, and then in order to do that, well, there's like monetization requirements. Like, oh well, we decided to not monetize your content because your stuff goes against our community guidelines or whatever. Or there's a lot of that. Or there's just well, we need your tax information before we'll even do that, and there might be just.
Joel, did we lose you here, buddy? I believe we might have lost Joel on our connection here. Hopefully he'll be re-clicking in anytime soon. This would be a good time for this would be a really apt time for me to tell people to share the stream. Let me hide Joel until he gets back. Hopefully he comes back. He was streaming, folks. By the way, he was connected to me through a wireless connection. I'm connected via landline. So yeah, I apologize for all the technical difficulties we have been having here tonight. I was really hoping to get into this a little bit more. Hopefully Joel will be back in just a second. Hopefully he's recognized that the stream has crashed and is willing to start over. But yeah, so advice to anyone out there doing any live streaming or connecting to anyone, make sure that you are using a landline, because you do occasionally get these drops from wireless that you don't get when you use a landline. I'm going to see if I can reconnect with Joel here. I wish I had an intermission or be right back screen. I kind of don't. So you guys are going to have to just bear with me. As far as the Liberty Block is concerned, we are still going to go live with the show on Sunday night. Hopefully we won't have any technical issues with the show on Sunday night. All right, let me send a message here to Joel to try reconnecting. All right, well, I'll give Joel just a few minutes here, and if we can't seem to get him back on, then I guess that'll be the end of the stream, which would be really, really, really disappointing. I won't tell you what software I'm using, but they will be getting a very angry phone call from me in the morning. And hopefully we can get Joel brought back on here. So let's see if we have any participation. So we don't have any questions to go through just yet. All right, I don't see Joel. He seems to be having problems trying to connect here. So let's see if I can't create a newer session with him. See if we can't bring him back. All right, folks. All right. We might have a workaround here to get him brought in. Okay, so it sounds like Joel is going to be calling in. All right, Joel, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, let's see if folks, let's see if this is coming through well on our streaming service here. Joel, welcome back to the stream.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me back on. I know you couldn't be away for that long, having on for a second show. What, mere minutes later?
Yeah, no. So, well, what I'll do while you're answering the next question is I'll try to get an image up, so we have at least something here for people to look at other than my sly face. So I think we were talking about is how people can how people who are potentially losing some work here can take advantage of crypto today to help them in their new situation or in their current situation.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. There's a lot of barriers to becoming an independent content creator, for example, that just aren't there when you can just receive micro tips, small transactions to fund whatever you're doing. It just makes those barriers so much smaller, so much easier. And I mean, for example, there are some services such as, say, Patreon or things like that that allow you to monetize your content through fiat currency means. Now, those take hefty percentages, and there's all kinds of different barriers, and they can shut down your account if they don't like what you're doing. And it's just basically having decentralized alternatives to all that is just another avenue for people who might have to be scrambling to find a new way to feed themselves. And of course, the same thing goes with fundraising for, say, charity causes. Like if you are in a real pinch and can't feed your family now, the process of setting up, like, say, GoFundMe, and then all the delays, and then the percentage they take and all that, could be pretty bad. Whereas all you have to do is just post out an address or a QR code or something online. And if someone sees you within like minutes, you could just have and then actually use and spend the money if they could help you out. So it makes things just so much smoother and more efficient, and just opens up a whole bunch of different opportunities. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that jobs and opportunities and things like that get created out of nowhere because there's magically this crypto token that just, produces jobs from nothing, right? It's not quite that simple. You still have to hustle. You still have to find, work, start your own thing, whatever, but it just makes it a whole lot easier to do.
So how would it in this circumstance? You talked about how the transition to gold wouldn't be as smooth because we don't really have the foundational structures in place to make that transition. Would that not be similar with crypto on an individual basis?
Not necessarily. So, first off, as long as the fiat systems are functioning, there's quite a few intermediary crypto services that work with it. For example, a fantastic company called Bitwage basically allows you to give their bank as a direct deposit, and then they send you your salary in cryptocurrency. And so something like that, as long as the old school payroll kind of services work, that works. And then same thing with the intermediary, say, like crypto debit card type things. There's a few others that do not necessarily rely on the old fiat system functioning in order to provide that bridge, such as, for example, there's a lot of gift card options out there that basically you can buy a gift card with cryptocurrency, like a gift code, and then you use it at the store. And since you're buying store credit, essentially, and you're basically whoever has it, the purveyor of that, just kind of trades that for the cryptocurrency. It is kind of a direct crypto for good transaction. Even though it has a US dollar value on it, more or less, doesn't mean you're actually exchanging for fiat currency in any way. And there are quite a few services that accept cryptocurrencies but convert instantly or relatively instantly to fiat currency in the bank. And in those kinds of situations, you could just imagine not converting, and then it's as simple as that.
All right, so I don't normally like to have the what is cryptocurrency conversation because that's been done 100 million times, and I was hoping to add something to that. So we are invariably. Do you agree with me? We are going to invariably see a skyrocketing of inflation as a result of this of the printing of $7 trillion. That we're going to have to just rely on printing rather than having any backing for it or any tax increase to pay for it. Do you agree with me that we're going to experience a substantial inflation in a relatively short period?
Yes. Now, I don't know if that's going to be on its own. And I think there will be other measures that governments employ to try to stem economic collapse. But unfortunately, economic collapse or depression at least will probably happen anyway. And
well, we know this one's going to happen.
Yeah, and so if you're already kind of promising a solution to that, like as soon as there's rumblings of things might not be going well in the future, as soon as that starts to happen, you then as a government, start giving out people money and cutting checks and things like that. And then when things get even worse, you don't do that. It's kind of like once you get on, you can't get off. It's probably going to continue, and even if it doesn't continue more, just what's been done already can cause a pretty nasty domino effect, I think.
So how would getting yourself involved how would cryptocurrency respond to an event like this?
You mean if someone wanted to inflate the cryptocurrency?
Well, no. I mean, so we're going to print out a ton of U.S. dollars, and that's going to deflate the value of the dollar, and that's going to have invariably some downstream effects on other fiat currencies as well, just because the U.S. dollar is backing the overwhelming majority of economic activity around the world in the end.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder what something like this... I'll ask that question too. I wonder what something like this would have I wonder what the effect would be of something like this on cryptocurrency, generally speaking. And I wonder if there's any way for that sort of circumstance to happen within cryptocurrency.
Yeah. So the only way I could see that turning out is clearly there's got to be a valuation shift. I mean, if you have something that, first off, just from accounting basics, I guess, just by multiplying the supply of dollars available would make the cryptocurrency denominated price higher. Even if say you got, one Bitcoin at $9,000 or something. Now, if you multiply the dollar supply by 10 times, then even if the purchasing power of that same Bitcoin stays exactly the same, it would still now be priced at $90,000. Now, if you have something that does not lose its value nearly that quickly versus something that does, I can see people dumping their dollars, not holding on to them for very long, and then that would obviously push up the price of whatever they're moving into, whether it be precious metals or or a digitally scarce asset. So I think it's kind of it's one of those things where if cryptocurrencies are useful, and I do believe that they are, and I believe their use will become higher over time. If they are useful, it's almost an inevitability that as the U.S. dollar becomes less useful, at least less useful in terms of storing value, then cryptocurrencies will increase. Now, as far as could that kind of situation happen with cryptocurrency? I mean, depends on which exact coin. Most of them have some sort of a very limited inflation, right? Like a fixed ultimate supply that, within 10, 15, 20, however many years ends up kind of running out. Now, not all of them do. So one that's pretty famous about it is called Dogecoin, which is made after a meme of a little Shiba Inu dog, and that one has infinite inflation, and just has infinite high inflation rate because it was not meant to be a store of value of any kind. It was just meant to be a fun little digital token that looks like a dog that you throw all over the internet and somehow has a massive valuation still, which is a little bit strange, but hey, roll with it. So that kind of stuff can happen to any cryptocurrency, I suppose. The problem is since there's no central party that controls most of them, then there's no way you could just unilaterally issue that. You'd have to have some sort of consent with the other people who run the network. And of course, governance systems in cryptocurrency is a very lengthy topic of how, and they're very different. But the other ultimate thing is with the U.S. dollar, they just print. There's just one currency for all of the United States, and it's also heavily used by other countries. And so one entity controls all that, and that's what is legal tender. There aren't competing fiat currencies. There are competing cryptocurrencies. So say you were able to compromise or somehow inflate one, then if there's hundreds of others, which are more than hundreds of others, then it's pretty easy to then just throw your value into the one that's not going to be inflated to where and back again. So just because of that competitive aspect of it, that they're not government mandated in any way, and that anyone can easily, as an open source project, anyone could just copy the code base, change a small parameter, and then there you go. I mean, and that did happen recently with a, social media driven coin called Steam, where some basically crypto tycoon from another project bought out one of the main blogging platforms that used that token, and then he used through some cronyist measures, he used a bunch of tokens that he got with the help of some of his friends to then kind of take over the network and so sort of run a decentralized currency / platform as something that he owns, like as his company. Pretty soon, a bunch of people just what they call forked the code. They just exactly copied the cryptocurrency, called it something else, and then that's everything everyone wants to use. And then the other one just kind of has been tanking in valuation. So it's like literally you just get the copy over, and then everyone migrates over. And I'm sure most people have gone to witness this sort of thing in a few different situations. For example, what if someone started a Facebook group or page, and then the admins of that group decided to start doing some nefarious things or things that the rest of the group didn't agree with? We frequently see splits in that case, where people just say, no, that's not good. I'm going to copy the group and just do the exact same group, except the way it was in the old days, not with this new controversial change. And then if they were on the right side of history, so to speak, then you get, everyone just migrates over to the new group, and then the old one becomes a ghost town. And then that's kind of like that. That's the defense mechanism that cryptocurrencies basically have against being controlled or inflated.
So, are you suggesting that it's a naturally existing control, or that there is some sort of external control to it?
It's a naturally occurring part of the code, because obviously these code bases are open source, which means anyone can look at them and anyone can propose changes. Anyone can copy that and create their own version. And just because of that, it's like child's play to just move over. The only reason why you have certain cryptocurrencies doing well is because they managed to attract a whole lot more users than a bunch of the other copy coins, as it were. And then those users, though, could potentially be pretty fickle. But also, and it's one of those things where like the decentralized consensus models are not something that a lot of people have to kind of wrap their heads around over time. But I like to think about it, it's like an idea. So if you have a prevailing idea, you just say, this is what I think a true, insert whatever X or Y concept is like. I believe that. And then everyone who subscribes that gives that idea knowledge. I mean, that idea, it gives it importance as knowledge. But say some of the people who are in charge of, let's just say, like, what's a real pizza? Is it New York or is it Chicago? And say it all starts with, like, New York pizza. Like, that's what a real pizza is. That's the idea of a pizza. And imagine a few of the top figures in that decide, you know what? We're going to start making it into this, like, deep dish casserole-like thing that you bake for a while and all. And then that could change the definition of what a pizza is, but you're probably going to have a lot of resistance, and then a whole bunch of other people break off, and then they do their own thing. And if basically you're one of only 3 people trying to say that this is pizza, then you just basically lose out. But if you manage to win out, then whoever the splitters who will decide to make their own little idea of what a real pizza is supposed to be like, then they lose. Or sometimes you have something where there are simultaneous competing visions of the same pizza. So that is what happened in the U.S. with pizza. One would call the major camps would be New York and Chicago. Those 2 styles of pizza, they managed to both be pizza, but both be kind of their own thing. And we've seen that with cryptocurrencies as well, where specifically with the Bitcoins, where there have been a few splits in the Bitcoin chain, and there's basically almost copies, but with some slight parameter differences that are kind of coexisting under different visions.
Okay. So are you actually familiar with how currency has evolved over the years and how we got to a point where we at one point had currency all the way from copper to bronze to gold and then eventually silver?
Yes, I remember reading all those books as a kid, especially, and the whole started with apples and then little rocks and then all the.
Well, the reason, a huge part of the reason gold was used. Well, there's a lot of reasons gold was used. Number one, in the times that gold was the standard, it was incredibly difficult to fake it and very easy to tell when something was not gold, because the only thing naturally existing that's more dense than gold and is consistently a solid is platinum. And I mean, you can just take one look at gold and one look at platinum and know the difference between the two. So what people would do is they just, drop it into a bucket, see what the volume is, and then weigh it, and bam, that's how you can tell how much gold it is. What got even more convenient was when you had banks that would put their stamp on a piece of gold to say it's 1 ounce, it's 1 gram of gold, kind of like what you showed us before. And then the banks that had that trust, that you could rely on for that gold to actually contain an ounce of gold, or a gram of gold, or whatever it would be, those banks just completely took over, and that was the currency that thus got exchanged. Paper currency has taken over. We don't need to get into the politics behind that. It is, I think you would agree with me, paper currency right now in the U.S., especially when we're referring to the U.S. dollar, is obviously more useful because it's accepted. It's accepted it's accepted everywhere in the U.S., and you'd be amazed where else it's accepted. In fact, for those of you folks looking to go to a tourist trap in Mexico for vacation, don't exchange your currency. Hold on to your U.S. dollars and just spend it there. And by the way, no price is firm in Mexico. So if you ever decide to go to Mexico, bring your U.S. dollars, because the exchange rates suck and they all take U.S. dollars there. So I think that if we're going to see the dominance of crypto, it's going to have to be as useful as the U.S. dollar is today. Where do you stand on that right now?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And like right now, I am in the process of making some sort of really newbie-geared video series about how to live off of cryptocurrency, but it starts just with the basics of like how to create a wallet, how to do all that kind of stuff. And in doing so, of course, I'm once again reminded that this stuff needs explaining, right? That is not quite user-friendly yet.
Right.
And there's a few things that I think there's a few key barriers to this stuff being used as everyday money across the world. And there's some of them I think are easily, some of them I think are difficult to solve but are being solved. Some of them are relatively easy to solve and are not being solved. And so, first off, transaction capacity on the network. And that's a subject that has a lot of contention depending on which political tribe you're talking to in the cryptocurrency community. But essentially,
if I can interrupt you, if you don't mind, you mean basically server capacity?
Or not sort of. Basically, network throughput.
Yeah.
And like how many transactions the network can process per second or per day. And so right now, I believe Bitcoin is around 7. And for plenty of
7 transactions per day.
Per second.
Per second. Okay.
Yeah. So if you look at the chart, it tends to kind of top out around 400,000 a day. And so that's not very many if you think about it.
Yeah.
So
yeah, considering in the New York Stock Exchange, the currency exchanges that happen behind the scenes are probably there alone.
Yeah. So when you start to think about how you scale a network up, the most obvious size is just to increase the size of the blocks on the blockchain. That every 10 minutes, a 1 megabyte block full of transactions come through. It's like a hard limit. And basically, with the idea, would be to double that or increase that many times. And of course, that's a very simple, elegant solution in that way. But it comes with its own host of issues with it, which become highly technical at that point. It's much more of a technical discussion. It is possible, and I do. In fact, a friend and neighbor of mine is actually a blockchain scaling researcher, and he tells me all of his latest research. And essentially, you can scale cryptocurrency to process Visa levels of transactions per day. It can be done, and I kind of know how to do it. So basically, but I think there's been sort of a bottleneck that's been more of a political thing where, that's again, super long conversation. So that's one. One is that the number one cryptocurrency used to be 85 to 90% of market share. And then since it's dipped, it's about in the 60s now, since it's dipped as low as like the 30s, that just did not scale to meet all new user demand.
So is that actually a good thing or a bad thing? Because one of the advantages of a scaled currency, a currency like the U.S. dollar, which has absolute ubiquity within the U.S. and just controls everything in the U.S. in terms of transactions, just about. One of the advantages of that is that you can always rely on it being accepted. So do you think that a 30% market share versus an 85% market share by itself is a good or a bad thing?
It's kind of both. Here, with everything, there's always a lot of nuance, but basically, my view on things is you want to have, for efficiency's sake, you want to have a few large providers, not like 100. So, for example, how many big box stores are there out there that are really effective? There's sort of a naturally occurring number that's sort of dominant ones that sort of permeate everywhere. We all have Amazon and Netflix, for example, and the thing is, once you have one group that has some sort of a monopoly, that's not good for consumers. And in a free market environment, monopolies don't really last. They get unseated by someone who outcompetes them. So it's kind of the same thing with cryptocurrencies. And so I think that probably Bitcoin would be in the 70s or 80s today as far as market share if it had scaled to meet all consumer demand, but then it ended up spilling over into other networks. But that's neither here nor there. The second thing is it's too difficult to use cryptocurrencies from a user standpoint. And it's not like it's super hard, but basically, if I want to send you money right now, I say, hey, give me your address. And so what you do is you open your wallet, and either if we're in person, you can pull up a QR code that I can scan, or if we're not, you copy and paste this big, long cryptographic hash, and it just gives some XXY134, all this kind of stuff. And then you send it to me, and I just look at it, and I'm like, oh, that looks like what he sent. All right, I'm going to go send it to that address. And then that becomes a little bit cumbersome because we as people don't communicate in long cryptographic hashes. Especially since every time I want to send you something, I usually get a new one of those addresses. Kind of like a reusable cup. You get a new one. Like a disposable cup. You
mean a URL, a web address?
Yeah, sort of like that.
Okay,
so
because when we're having a currency conversation and we're talking about sending people money, the address, when you use the word address, it would be. I think we probably ought to be clarified on that matter.
Yeah, so imagine if I would send to a web URL instead, right? If
Yeah.
every time I wanted to go check out your stuff, I would go to libertyblock.com. But then the next time I went, I have to go to blockliberty.com. And then the third time, it has to be liberblock159.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same. It's the same with these live stream keys. They give me a 50 character stream key, and then every single time I go live, I have to do a new one.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with stream keys because I use them too, right? But the problem is that's for technical people who run a show. That's not for everyday people doing. It's not for Granny. Granny's not going to mess with the stream key.
Yep.
Kidding me? So basically, the cryptocurrency I use, Dash, has been building this decentralized username-based system for many years, and it's out on testnet right now, which means it's kind of like in testing. It's not out. It's not publicly released yet. But that's something that hopefully, if you can just send to @LibertyBlock, for example, if you want to pay them, and it does all the cryptographics nonsense back end, that could be a huge boom. And then, of course, the other thing is just, infrastructure is one thing, sure, but volatility is kind of the big thing, because right now, the first time I ever earned any of the Dash cryptocurrency for, in exchange for services, it was $7 per coin. So I got paid 3 Dash to write an article. By the end of, within a year of that time, that $7 coin was worth, $1,600. And then within, 2 years after that, it was $38. And now it's somewhere around in the early 80s. So that's clearly upward trajectory volatility, but it's still significant volatility. And you can't really run a business based on that unless you're really intrepid. And so
right. So So I was actually gonna ask you then, and you can probably finish that thought with this. What then is the exposure to risk?
So you mean the current exposure to risk?
Right, because usually when there's a volatility within a market, there's an inherent exposure to risk that is specific to that volatility.
I'm not sure if I get quite the nuance of the question.
Okay, so if you have volatility within, if you have volatility within the honey market, it could be the fact that that bees just die randomly, right? So the volatility of the prices is because because you have a huge risk of just sudden colony collapse, for example.
Yeah.
Right. So that's what you might run into with a currency with a normal fiat currency. You might have what you had in Europe when the euro came around, which is the exposure of risk is that a government edict comes around and totally devalues the entirety of the Italian lira, right? Because when the euro came around, if you had lira by the end of it, if you have lira today, it's an antique. It's something you hang up on a wall. You can't use it for anything. It's useless.
Mm-hmm. So the volatility risk in cryptocurrency, what introduces that. So right now, mostly the volatility comes from not that much usage in commerce, and a lot of usage for speculative purposes. Basically, people will buy it hoping the price will be different a different day, and rather than a relatively stable price demand. So, for example, say if I get to make payroll for my 25 employees around the world, and if I can do it with cryptocurrency, I save a whole bunch of money. Then if the price fluctuates slightly, first off, there's demand for people like me to buy it at spot price. I don't need to try to get a good deal on it. I just I want it for that price, and if the price changes a little bit, I overpay a little bit, but I still get to do my thing. This technology still works for me. Then I'm okay with that. So there's just a lot more stability coming from that kind of economic activity than there is for right now. People are mostly gambling on the fact that this will be used like that someday, even though it isn't yet. So there you're okay, I want to buy it low, and then when it goes high, I'm going to try to sell it.
Yeah, and I mean that speculative investment is something that happens with every commodity on Earth and with every currency ever. People do that today with the euro, where they'll exchange U.S. dollars for the euro, and hope that the euro stays stronger through an inflationary period.
Yeah. So other volatility risks. So in the short term, volatility risk comes from what regulators are going to do about cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
And that used to be a much bigger thing than it is today, because it seems like in the early days, governments either did absolutely nothing about cryptocurrency. They pretended like it didn't exist, or they just didn't like it and tried to ban it. And so both of those introduced price fluctuations, of course. Now, it seems like a lot of things have stabilized a little bit more. I do believe there's a lot more regulation coming. But basically, they've managed to regulate a lot of the larger exchanges, and then basically subject a lot of businesses to money laundering, anti-money laundering constraints. And then, of course, just requiring people report capital gains and things like that. But they've been very light in terms of there's been compared to a whole lot of other industries, it's been very light so far. And so I don't really see that picking up. I think the early days of people being scared as far as regulators, at least, being scared or uncertain about this new asset class, I think they're kind of over. But the other volatility risk that you kind of see in the future is technical. So cryptocurrencies, as technology, they work on, they basically are vulnerable to bugs and things like that. Now, not very much, because as open source technology that potentially millions of people around the world are actually looking at and combing through the code and making sure it works as functions as advertised, it's a pretty low risk. But still, there are some things like, for example, what happens if you find an exploit that allows someone to kind of take over control of the network more easily? Then, okay, now you have to react to that. You might have to change a few things. There's a few different security models. And there's also, for example, a great deal of Bitcoin's mining power, which is basically what runs the network and what creates new coins, is focused in China. Large mining farms and power plants and stuff in China is a good chunk of that. So there's a possibility that either there's some kind of a regional national disaster or some kind of a government crackdown. You could see some giant fluctuations in that. Now, it's pretty different because than, say, losing a power station for any other kind of infrastructure, because the way cryptocurrency mining works, if you have, say, 80% of your whole mining power, the whole infrastructure behind it, just goes up in flames, then the 20% that's remaining not only is enough to run the network still, but gets the money of the 80%. Now, that profit gets instantly redistributed to them. And, of course, if they're getting such a killer deal mining, then you'll probably have more people pop up right away and build more things to capture the network. The only risk in a fluctuation like that is, say, during a temporary moment of weakness where you only have 20% of the infrastructure behind it, someone who has a lot decides to use that time to go take over the network. And it's a very small window, and it's possible, but it hasn't happened. And I'm sure if there's a profit motive, people have been trying. It's just one of those kind of, basically in the future, you can probably see things like that kind of happening, adding a little bit of volatility back into the mix. But ultimately, I think with a whole lot of usage as a real money, I think that we can definitely see significantly reduced volatility in the future.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you could do one of the things that we talked about last week too was tangibility. So if you introduce some degree of tangibility, for example, maybe not necessarily notes or cash in the way that we think of it today, but if you had some sort of card that you could use to just swipe like you would normally use, or like something that would function ostensibly the way that we use credit cards today, that was a bit more ubiquitous, then I think you'd see people having face-to-face transactions that wouldn't rely on, software built into a piece of hardware that may not be compatible with other pieces of hardware.
Yeah, and there's a friend of mine who has been working on some projects that basically is like basically a modern day ready retail system, a retail payment system, and included in that is a NFC based card, like a plastic card that you can use to load some cryptocurrency on. So whenever you tap it on the machine, you have to just transfer it, sort of like a tap and pay credit card or something.
Or like a pay as you go gift card.
Yeah, and so it's basically like a tap and go card today, except as always with all credit cards and debit cards and things, the payment never settles for sometimes days, if not weeks. It's not fully done. It just kind of the payment shows up right away, and it's kind of good enough that it doesn't go through to where the merchant can move that to their bank account for a while. And that's depending on the cryptocurrency, if it's something like Dash, it can be fully settled in like 2 seconds. So, which is something that just does not happen with the old payment models. And so, even something like Bitcoin that takes a longer time, it could be 10 minutes to an hour or whatever. That's still a pretty quick, relatively permanent settlement time compared to a lot of the way the banking system works today.
I mean, in some respects, I mean, I've one of the advantages too of the current system is that I have half a dozen banks within walking distance of me that I can, if I have $1,000 cash, it'll take the cash. If I have investments in them in $1,000 in U.S. dollars, I can take out that $1,000 on a moment's notice. And usually they'll extend it to me as in the form of effectively credit.
Not like a few weeks ago when they were limiting withdrawals to $500 at most banks during the whole.
That's true.
Banks at the beginning of the crisis.
That's true. Yeah. How would those regulatory effects with something like coronavirus, since that's the topic here, how have they affected crypto? For example, have you run into any problems making any transfers with it, making any payments with it as a specific result of some specific legislation? Or executive action?
I think mostly they've had bigger fish to fry, and during the short term, just about the entire market crashed in the beginning, and then of course even gold crashed, and then things have since rebounded. And just when people were making a run on whatever, basically they wanted cash because cash got them toilet paper, and that's kind of like the immediate needs, the hierarchy of needs.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things where I believe we can kind of not see market dumps is if you can buy your toilet paper with this kind of stuff. And that's a different thing, is like people don't really trust banks implicitly. As much as they do, they don't. Because if people trust the banks, then why would they be trying to run and get cash out so much that banks are running out of cash? In some way, they're just like, well, what happens if the bank goes down? I don't know if this is going to work. Now,
right, and that would be the original exposure. The risk exposure with somebody investing in banknotes years and years and years ago. So we have a single currency that is run by a central bank. So I don't have to worry about East Tennessee State Bank or whatever. I don't have to worry about it going out of business and losing all of my money if I have just the cash stored there, because it's the cash. Yeah.
Not of going out of business. Now, as far as availability of cash. There's definitely concerns about that, about whether your regional bank has enough or whether the staffing shortages cause you did not have any access to your funds. And that's something about if you have paper cash in the house, then that's something you can sort of rely on to a certain extent. Obviously, I'm very skeptical about the long-term value of said paper, but at least it's something that you can't just say, I have it in a safe somewhere that someone else is controlling. If I can't get in contact with that person, I can't get it. And that's what I think that is the promise of digital cash, is if you get to the point where you can reliably use it, or people will reliably take it for bare essentials, not just in a couple places, but everywhere, then you basically will be able to store your vault, your Swiss bank accounts, so to speak, in your own house, and then you'll still be able to use it at a moment's notice to buy bare essentials. And at that point, I don't think we see any kind of a crash.
So, I mean, we talked about this, and we should probably get this disclaimer basically out there. By the way, thanks to everyone who's been watching along. We're actually going to probably just be wrapping up relatively soon here. For everyone who's watching, if this is a topic that interests you and you really want to see us grow here at the Liberty Block, please do share this stream. That's the thing more than anything else that's going to help us. I know I screwed up the technicals pretty bad so far today, and I know that things haven't gone as well as even as badly as they normally do. They still haven't gone as well as they normally do here with this stream. But yeah, if you guys could share this, that would be a huge help to the stream. It would be a huge help to helping Joel spread his message as well. So if you like what you're seeing, please do share that. So we talked last week, and I think this is a good segue for this, about how there's three ways to look at an investment in crypto. One is the speculative way that we talked about. It's basically like a stock, and it functions in many respects like having shares in Amazon, though it is in some way in that if Amazon only had a limited number of shares and couldn't just magically create them out of nothing. It functions very similarly to the trading of a share of stock, in addition to the fact, of course, that a share of stock cannot be broken up into partial shares. But the other way to look at crypto, and I think this is where you and I kind of agreed that this is not a good rationale for investment, is as a hedge against risk. So where market volatility, where you might have an argument for gold, is that you don't want to have all of your money in gold. You do want to have some of it in there just in case you have a colossal stock market crash, because the price of gold is, generally speaking, inverse directionally from the economy generally. So if you have 20% of your 10%, say, of your investments in gold, then if the stock market tanks, at least you can cash in some of that gold, and the price of gold will tend to increase, and you can actually make money off of a recession in that respect. So we kind of agreed last week that is a poor rationale for investment in crypto. So, I mean, does that still hold? And what would you say is a good explanation for why that's the case?
Yeah, as far as that's one of those things where cryptocurrency as it's designed is very different from where it is now, sort of a thing. And so, for example, it's somebody. Imagine, I don't know how familiar you are with, or all the listeners are, but basically the way the Libertarian Party operates. But maybe it's a controversial thing to say. I don't think it's quite ready for prime time as far as the organization, as far as the candidates that are usually fielded, as far as the messaging, as far as a lot of things. But that doesn't mean that having a libertarian run on a national stage and possibly try to win serious elections is a bad idea. No, I don't think it at all. In fact, I think it's a fantastic idea. So, I mean, as far as we're caring about elections and such. So the same thing with cryptocurrency. A lot of people do sort of see, I mean, it is a speculative asset with a certain amount of risk. That's kind of where it is now. Now, the way it's designed technically, not the way the market is matured right now, but the way it's technically designed, it works great as a hedge against some sort of collapse of centralized systems like central banks and fiat currencies. It's like a wonder hedge against that. It just hasn't quite panned out like that yet because it's still too immature of a commodity or as a currency. So I'm kind of viewing it as both, because it can be one thing and then it can be the other thing. And so, for example, when the specific cryptocurrency of Bitcoin came around, it was as a censorship-resistant payment vehicle, and as a store of value that's resistant to inflation. That's kind of both of those things. Now, because its usage is sort of capped at 400,000 transactions a day, it's kind of more of just the store of value right now. And so in that same way, I kind of view cryptocurrencies right now as the entire reason I'm in them is because they can't be easily inflated or controlled or censored, like all that hedge against all the nasty things that are coming down the pipeline.
Yeah,
So,
and that's actually the argument for gold, is that in the same way, there's only so much gold to be mined right now in the world. I mean, we're mining very, very, very little of it compared to what we used to, just because we've mined so much of what's available to us that's easily accessible anyways. So I mean, that's another reason why gold was chosen for a long time as the standard for currency. It was incredibly rare, and it wasn't like you were going to likely run into a situation where without much effort, you're going to just have a ton of it dumped into your lap out of nowhere. So
yeah, of course. Yeah, so it's the same sort of situation where I think that cryptocurrencies are a great hedge against all that kind of devaluation, volatility, things like that, and in crisis situations, but just not yet, with a lot of realism that right now is acting like a speculative stock, like Tesla stock or something.
Yeah.
Right? Well, let's see where this goes. It's kind of acting more like that now, but it has the potential. It's sort of like investing. It's sort of like a long-term investment, if you think about it, that you're kind of investing in it being a long-term investment in the long term. Like right now, it would be paved like some kind of a speculative plaything. But in time, you kind of believe or trust that it will mature into what it has the potential to be, which is something that's really rock solid and doesn't move at all.
Which is actually
forget.
Yeah. So
during the whole
the third thing that we suggested as a reason to do it is to use it as a medium of exchange, to pay for things, which which is where you want to see it go.
Yeah, absolutely. And lest we forget, during the original Brexit vote for Great Britain to leave the European Union, during that time, Bitcoin was a more stable currency than the British pound. Now, obviously, that introduces a little bit more volatility because of the turbulent political times, but also Bitcoin had a lot more commercial use at the time. And so we can already see that little snapshot. We can easily see something like this in 10, 20 years when these kinds of cryptocurrencies are adopted in a much broader scale. I mean, the U.S. dollar is relatively stable, except it gets manipulated, inflated, and all these other kinds of nasty things. Now, imagine how stable it would be if it had a completely fixed supply and was not able to be manipulated like that. And so that's kind of the future I'm hoping for.
Yeah, I mean, I still don't see how it wouldn't be the case that you could artificially inflate that, correct? Like if that was your goal to artificially, so let's say the federal government said, you know what, or the central bank, right? Let's say the central bank here in the U.S. said, we are going to no longer be printing U.S. dollars. All of our currency is now going to be digital, and the currency is going to function identically to, Bitcoin. So everybody trade in, go to your banks, trade in your dollars for Bitcoin now, because that's where we're headed.
Yeah, it's definitely worth some sort of exposure.
Right. And I don't see how, if the central bank is going to do that, number one, they would obviously want their own currency. So it wouldn't be Bitcoin. It'd be US coin or something. Right. And I don't see why and this is maybe the cynic in me, why they wouldn't build a code that would allow them to inflate that, allow them to say, okay, now there are more Bitcoin than there were before.
Yeah, so now here's where, of course, it gets complicated, because my views on government versus liberty and things like that are pretty, at the core, they're pretty simplistic. But when it comes to what the actual world will look like, it's of course a little bit more nuanced. So, for example, I do believe that decentralized digital assets and currencies will bring about the end of the fiat currency and central banking system as we know it.
Really? How soon do you think that'll be?
Oh, who knows? 20,
years, decades, or centuries? Years, decades, or centuries?
Well, I think it'll happen relatively soon, like within a few decades, because I just see the lack of competitiveness in the old systems, and the nonsense they've been pulling now. There's so many, and also I don't know if it's just a bias as someone who's getting older, but I notice that time seems to move so much faster these days. Like, to just think about all the crazy things that have happened this year already, not just the whole stages of pandemic and things like that, but then we almost had World War III earlier in the year, and it's like, that's already old news. Just things seem to be accelerating. So I do think it will happen, but I don't think it's going to be as dramatic as all the bad people just like go down with the ship, and then the new stuff is going to be completely awesome and free of corruption. So first off, I'm pretty sure that most central bankers have some kind of an exposure to cryptocurrencies right now. And I think that as they see their world crumbling, they're going to increase their exposure. And that means at some point they're going to be a part of the new system. Maybe not completely dominating the new system like they were the old, but they probably will be somehow involved. Now, there are quite a few technologies and companies sort of built on these decentralized technologies. So, for example, there's a company called Blockstream, which runs a network called like the Liquid Network, which is sort of an IOU-based top layer on top of Bitcoin, where basically you can lock up Bitcoin in the network and move it around really quickly and easily to a bunch of different exchanges and other things like that. And it's kind of like a easy settlement layer, but at the same time I have not looked too much into the original investment, but I believe that they had some major banks investing in the company. And at the same time, you don't actually control the funds that you're using to move around. You kind of don't. And so it's sort of like a bank on top of Bitcoin. And there's things like that that are already surfacing now that, basically have those kinds of effects. And I think like the largest cryptocurrency exchanges, while they might be created by, entrepreneurs and coders and people like that right now, I think at some point you're going to see some major investors and players in the old fiat system start to show up in there. And so it's not I'm not naive enough to have the simplistic view that we're just going to wash out the old system and the new system's all going to be awesome. I think that we'll end up shedding a whole lot of the people who are involved in the old system, but not all of them, and they will be involved in the new system to a certain extent. But I think that we as a whole, as a species and as a country, will be much better off regardless.
Right, and you talked about the competition. I want to give you just a little bit of pushback there, because when you said monopolies are not really a good thing, I think if we saw a naturally existing monopoly in a currency system, which I don't think you could get unless it was in the type of monetary system that is happening behind the scenes with crypto, the most useful currency, the best currency, is just going to take over, right? And that's what we saw in the ancient days of the conversion of when we converted from copper to bronze, and then very quickly then from there to gold as the standard. The gold standard and the banks that stamped that gold, that made that switch over into copper, just there was only one, right? Like in ancient Greece, you had one basically. You had these banks, but they all ran on this centralized, basically on a centralized currency because there was one that was just useful. And if 70% of people are using this currency, then the liquidity it brings is to those 70% of people, right, or the 70% of transactions, really is going to hurt the 30% that you're not using that for. So in the case of, like, again, the lira in its death knells, right? So it was still accepted for a while after the euro came out in Italy, but but people basically just stopped using it because they knew what was coming. And and you wind up, and I think that if you have a brand of cryptocurrency that, let's say it's not like light years ahead of everyone else, but let's say it's clearly better, right? Clearly a more useful product, right? I don't know that if it naturally gets to a point where it's basically the only crypto on the market, I don't see that as necessarily a bad thing, because the fact that everyone is using it is a strength of that currency.
Yeah, it's definitely, those network effects are very difficult to overcome. And I think that the only way you do overcome them is by having just a severe difference in usability on technical levels. So I definitely think you will find here's my view. As far as networks, overarching networks, I think as far as a currency-based network, like the thing that people use to send value around and store value primarily, I do think that there will probably be only a few globally, like just a couple. Now, as far as, because of the way the technology is created, there are quite a few other risks. There's quite a few other applications for it that would maybe necessitate a different network for different use cases. So, for example, say executing smart contracts, you might want something with some different abilities. And so, for example, one of the biggest things just in the payment space is when you think about the value proposition of cryptocurrency, it's that it's extremely transparent. The entire network is publicly auditable by anyone, anywhere, with no extra technology or competency, really. You just have to go out and look at a block explorer, have a little bit of practice in that. And that's how you know you can have faith in the strength of networks. You know exactly how many coins are out there. You know exactly the supply. You know exactly how much is being moved on a day-to-day basis. You know exactly how many transactions. You might not know the people and the actual economic actions that represent. You get to just audit the whole network. Now, there are some privacy-enhanced cryptocurrencies, which, by the way, is a great thing to have. It's great to be able to have privacy in your financial transactions. But if they're completely obfuscated, completely encrypted, at that point you cannot audit the network anymore. You can't really know everything that's going on from a high level, and there's always the risk of an inflation bug. So, for example, say you take something like Bitcoin, and then there's a bug in the code that causes more coins to be generated than you otherwise thought. So basically, you literally could have runaway inflation by a coding mishap. But you get to start seeing that happen on the network. Oh, and by the way, this did happen before. You start seeing this happen, and then you scramble to patch the code and fix it, and everyone involved runs the new code, and then it's all fixed. Now, if you have a completely obfuscated coin, then you cannot actually know if such a thing took place ever. You basically say, oh, this is there's a, say, 80 million unit cap on this currency. We think, because we can't be 100% sure, it could be a million times that, we'd never know. So because of that, there's always these little trade-offs, and because of that, I kind of say like maybe a dozen or a half dozen major networks end up dominating. It's kind of my rough prediction. Now, as far as for usage as actual money that people are going to be paying things with, it's probably going to be like in the 1 to 3 range, I'm guessing.
Yeah, because that's what it's going to take to get people to start using it as a medium of exchange. Yeah, ubiquity. Yeah, because you're right. I mean, you're competing with the U.S. dollar, and the U.S. dollar is ubiquitous. It's accepted everywhere. Everyone has it. So I think you're right. It's going to wind up coming down to probably like 1 or 2 of these currencies, and then eventually, I personally think that you'll if this thing takes hold, which without malfeasance it probably will. If it takes hold, I do see in the long term there being one currency that's just noticeably better than everything else that everyone just switches over to completely. If we completely lose faith in the U.S. dollar, which is also, I think, that's something that's going to happen to make that transition.
Yeah, I mean, the U.S. dollar came from somewhere. It wasn't number one, like say 500 years ago.
Well, yeah, that's true. And It didn't exist 500 years ago. But yeah, so what would you say, basically, as we wrap up here, to somebody who's, we're in this coronavirus situation, and somebody who has lost their job and is saying, you know what, this sounds like this might be to my benefit, or you know what, this sounds crazy, but I am desperate. So what would you say to somebody in one of those desperate situations when it comes to the conversion of their U.S. dollars into a cryptocurrency?
Yeah, so I don't think that said person exists today. I don't think that if you're desperate in economic financial situations in the U.S. today, I don't think it's probably wise to switch over to cryptocurrency. If you're anticipating being desperate in the future, that's a different story, because we're not quite at this point of, it's still one would call it a speculative phase. So basically, I would encourage people to take a small exposures and something you can absolutely afford to lose in something that, you let's say like one of the top 20 cryptocurrencies that you have done a little bit of research on, and you just think that sounds interesting. I've heard a lot of smart people recommend it. That's a good place to start, but the biggest thing is just try to use this stuff. And so I have this hashtag going around called the Fiat Free Challenge. And if you look at that, you can just kind of see what people are doing or what people are talking about this whole thing. And you can kind of ask for, and of course I'm going to be putting up a video series about how to actually do this stuff, step by step. And it's going to, of course, fall under that hashtag. So I would definitely encourage people to check that out. And because if you want to give this a shot, you don't need to be like, oh, I'm just changing my whole life over, man. I'm just dumping the dollar. It's like, no, why don't you can just buy like $20 or $50 of this stuff, and at least at a time, and then play around with it, send it here and there, see what you can buy with it, do some more research, doing some chat forums now. Hey, how does this work? How does that work? And then just kind of get used to it, and you'll get it. That's one thing that, of course, I always tell people is when I use fiat currency, I always remember there's always some kind of like guilt or shame behind using money. Money's not like it's a dirty thing in society. It's like, well, we have to make sure you have the authorization to do that, and it's just like it's this gravitas behind it. But when you send and receive cryptocurrency, which has the same or more value, it's so easy that it's freeing. It's fun to use, and you can't really quantify what makes something fun. And I'm not just saying, hey, do a thing because it's fun. But the truth behind that is that there is nothing really stopping you from using it, and there's no government that issued this stuff that is going to get angry at you for using it in the wrong way. In fact, most of the regulations that do fall on cryptocurrency have something to do with turning them into dollars, to where it turns into what they care about. But like, you can literally copy it's like counterfeiting encouraged. You can literally copy a cryptocurrency. Now, of course, you don't actually copy the units on that same chain. It is still like, say, 21 million Bitcoin are still permanent. But you can make a copy of Bitcoin right now and just play around with it, send it all over the place, and just, call it some stupid name. There's a Ron Paul coin out there, for example. You can just do whatever silly stuff you want. And when you do that, you start to realize like the freeing capacity of that. And as I always say, as a key example, I just do like social media posts, and then people will like tip me. They'll throw me some coin. And can you imagine if you're just having a chat with a bunch of friends in a coffee shop, and then you say something that really makes them laugh, and hey, that's good. Here, let me give you $5 for that. Like, that's horrendously awkward. And it's a little bit of a silly example, but it shows the point of this is something different we're dealing with. And if people are so stingy with their money today, and I don't mean stingy in the sense of they're prone to saving. They're very prone to spending it on some things, but not other things. And when you have something that people are just, because of the lack of limitations on how and where and why it can be spent around, when you have people start to use this sort of thing, you start to open up all kinds of different sectors of the economy that didn't exist yet. Like, for example, I was in nonprofits. I was a nonprofit fundraiser in my previous life, and that was always a thing that I had to take a salary to basically get people to pay for stuff that they valued but they couldn't buy. No one buys clean air or a poor or a less poor world. There's no product in the store. You can't sell it. No one will pay for that. But people will pay for it through an intermediary known as a fundraiser. Now, I think we're moving to the world where things like that don't need an intermediary anymore, where artists just get a lot of exposure to their work, and that is monetized in and of itself, where, things like that, where there's so many different possibilities, and you can't really get it until you try it. So that's what I'm saying. Try it.
So like a following on Instagram or a following on YouTube or a following, I know that Twitch actually does a better job of basically creating a currency of its viewership, where you can literally trade subs with people with their platform. But I see what you're saying with artists and how just the mere exposure alone can be used as a medium of exchange. Joel, if you just want to let everybody know I hope we have some questions for Q&A. If we don't, everybody, again, share this stream, and that's what's going to help us build our viewership. If you guys at home have some questions for Joel about currency and about especially cryptocurrency, get them in now. While we're just getting ready to go into transition into Q&A, if we have any Q&A to do. Joel, how could people reach you as we wrap up again?
So the easiest way, of course, Twitter is my most public network, but the username, The Desert Links. Again, Links is in cat, desert is in dry place. And that's where most of my social media handles are under. Just put that in somewhere. And if you want to actually look at the stuff I put out on cryptocurrency, look up Digital Cash Network.
Digital Cash Network. Wonderful. All right, let's see if we have any questions for Q&A. No, unfortunately, we don't. Normally we have about 4 or 5. I guess that's probably because of all the technical difficulties losing the initial viewership. So sorry about all that, folks. But Joel, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
All right, we'll see y'all next week. Well, actually, we'll see y'all on Sunday night when we do our Liberty Block live stream for our weekly. So until then, good night, everybody.